Welcome to Proto-Future, a podcast about single-handedly taking on the multi-trillion-dollar automobile industrial complex. This is episode 10, introducing the Centre County Highway Revolt. In this episode, I'll tell you all about a citizen-led initiative to revitalize small-town economies, improve our health, prevent tax waste, and save the environment. To start off, this podcast is going out to a bunch of different audiences. If you're a regular listener of BGT or PFP, this is all about a side project put together by me and some friends, entirely self-funded as a way to hopefully massively and permanently change the conversation on municipal infrastructure in Pennsylvania and beyond. If you're not one of my regular listeners, you've probably found this project through one of our ad campaigns or sponsorships, social media posts, or just a lawn sign around the region. If that's you, then welcome. This podcast is another side project I've been running since about 2017, originally starting as the beginner's guide to model railroading, but then I had a mental breakdown a few years back about how older model railroaders fetishize the trains of the past while actively inhibiting the trains of the present. So I revamped Beginner's Guide into an exploration of modern urbanism and railroading from the 30,000-foot perspective that only model railroading can provide. This podcast has become quite an adventure, from interviewing major hobby celebrities to even once being part of the Amtrak media pool. Feel free to poke around the back catalog if you're curious. But in both cases, I want to share with you my side of the Centre County Highway Revolt. First, we'll cover the background of how this project came to be, then we'll go into the details of the plan itself. I'll probably spend the bulk of the time addressing why you should support this plan over alternatives, and finally, I'll share how you can help. I'll note here that it's probably a good idea to pull up and page through the website for visual aids, found at www.centrecountyhighwayrevolt.org. That's Centre spelled C-E-N-T-R-E, Charlie Echo November Tango Romeo Echo. You can also find a link in the show notes. Anyway, let's begin. I myself lived a fairly normal American lifestyle, growing up in suburbs around the country from Florida to Washington state. I road-tripped probably a lot more than average and have made it to not only all 50 states, but 103 of the 150 largest cities in the U.S. and over 200 national parks and historic sites. However, during the past decade, starting around the time of COVID, as it did for many people, I've come to learn the harm that car-oriented development causes for basically every aspect of our lives. Much in the same way that, when a friend made an argument for veganism so compelling I couldn't ignore it and have since changed my diet, I also learned that cars are so problematic that my personality and lifestyle were obliged to follow suit. I used to own a car and road trip to all 67 counties in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, but I've since sold it and am now living exclusively off of my bicycles and public transit. While there is much more to say on this journey, some of which I'll cover in a moment, the two most important parts that relate to the Centre County Highway Revolt are thusly: a trip to Switzerland and a trip to New Jersey. Apologies to regular listeners as this is repetitive, but I'll be quick. First, a few years ago, my sister decided to earn her master's degree at ETH in Zurich, Switzerland. As one may guess, every imaginable long-lost friend or family member imposed on her for a private tour of the Alps in free lodging, as did I for over 2 weeks. Among many, many other things I learned and saw over that trip, I found that Switzerland had a nationwide rail network with clock-face scheduling, trains running every half hour departing to the entire rest of the country and even continent. Something insane, like 70% of all Swiss residents live within a 15-minute walk of a train station with hourly service or better. The most important part of this is that rail service isn't just urban, but rural, with trains every 30 minutes stopping in villages as small as 400 people. Hell, some of the stations served no people at all, acting as base camps for hiking and wilderness adventures. Sure, there are some minor differences between the banking capital of planet Earth and the Appalachian Rust Belt, but Switzerland has approximately the same size, population, and population density as at least portions of Pennsylvania, and they prove unequivocally that rail transit is not just viable, but convenient and preferable even to rural small towns, and even in rough mountainous terrain. If someone says to you that Pennsylvania can't have good trains because it's just too hilly, they're lying. The highest mountain in Appalachia is 900 meters tall. The highest mountain in the Alps is nearly 5,000. If they can do it, we can do it too. Perhaps we're not as affluent or as important as Switzerland, but that might only mean that we can justify a train every 90 minutes instead of every 30. Currently, we get trains only every 1,500 minutes to only 7 towns west of Harrisburg. I think there's a small gap in the market. The other trip of note is much closer to home, to New Jersey. Over the pandemic lockdowns, one of my projects helping to keep the Penn State Model Railroad Club aloft, Penn State's second longest continuously operating club, was to make a bunch of PowerPoint presentations, one of which happened to be on diesel multiple unit hybrid light rail transit, or simply DMUs. The Zoom presentation to the club later evolved into a bigger presentation series, which I've given in person at model railroading conventions from Massachusetts to Texas. DMUs are a very infrastructure-light form of rail transit, for the foamers out there basically being a modernized and improved form of RDCs, which are used for rural rail transit not just all over the world, but also in nearly a dozen North American cities. The first DMU on this side of the Atlantic was a suburban transit operation opening in 2001 in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, using hand-me-down German vehicles, but the first purpose-built American DMUs opened in 2004 between Trenton and Camden, New Jersey Transit's River Line. DMUs are not the highest quality form of transit. They don't run the fastest, they don't carry the most people. They're not even the most energy-efficient form. The River Line will never make as much revenue as the Lexington Avenue subway in New York City. But here's the special power. DMUs are not a way to make existing rail transit cheaper, but instead a cheaper way to make rail transit, lowering the barrier to entry to create new lines that wouldn't be otherwise justifiable under America's presently egregious construction costs. DMUs can run on existing freight rail lines for nary more than the cost of the vehicles and a couple of thousand cubic yards of concrete for the platforms. America has terrible intercity passenger rail, but it does have a world-leading freight railroad network. The secret is that many of the smaller branch lines get at most a train a day, more often a train a week. Once you understand this, you'll be radicalized into seeing literally any railroad track anywhere as a potential high-frequency transit corridor. Literally, each vehicle costs just a few $1 million apiece, gets better gas mileage than an SUV, the tracks are already there, hell, make the platforms out of dirt to start and then cover them up with concrete later, and that's it, you're done. Where there was no modern transit, now there is, all by repurposing existing infrastructure. It should thus come as no surprise that the River Line is currently in the process of being doubled in length and double-tracked, and is wildly popular with residents in that area of New Jersey. Now, the last part of this journey came from many places, but is probably best summarized by a video released a few years ago entitled Why Urbanism on YouTube Has a Huge Problem by the Nth Review. While I have many personal gripes with this video, he does make a poignant observation, that internet urbanism discourse is mired in a bimodal distribution, either overly idealistic, utopia-seeking of the America should be more like Europe flavor, or the unnecessarily mundane, proposing only minor improvements to existing service, not the national-level overhaul that is so sorely needed for quality of life and sustainability. Again, caveating that this video has many flaws, it nonetheless notes that urbanists should, for lack of a better phrase, get the fuck out there and get dirty in local politics to at least bring a fraction of an ideal world into fruition, not either hole yourself up in your basement fantasizing about an ideal world that will never be, or fully giving over into cynicism and abandoning any hope of an ideal world. I think it was once said that realism is when idealism meets compromise, not when idealism is met with ridicule. So, hence, I'm here, with the Centre County Highway Revolt, using my expertise and broader perspective, combined of course with the input of a bunch of other contributors, to promote not just a project, but a realistic vision for a better future for central Pennsylvania, one which I hope will echo positively across the entire state and region. That all being the case, what exactly is the Centre County Highway Revolt? Well, to set the stage, amidst massive local opposition, PennDOT is trying to ram a highway project down our beautiful Penns Valley. At only 8 miles long but over 200 feet wide and expected to cost almost $1 billion, this highway, the State College Area Connector, or SCAC, will result in the demolition of hundreds of acres of heritage area-listed farms and pristine mountainside forests, with all possible routes involving the destruction of beloved community institutions, the Tate and Coons farms. PennDOT is trying to justify this project under the auspices of safety and freight truck traffic, which we will cover more in a moment why this isn't realistic, but if nothing else, there's already an existing, perfectly functional road, US Highway 322, which is expected to broadly have a 0 to 1% increase in truck traffic over the next 25 years, but which they're trying to turn anyway into a hyper-industrial conveyor belt from Cleveland to Wilmington. I think we can all agree that this is a bad idea. So, rather than simply saying no, like unproductive NIMBYs, we at the Centre County Highway Revolt would instead like to propose an alternative, one which we think is realistic. Whether or not PennDOT wants to acknowledge it, the numbers indicate that a majority of traffic over 322 is not trucks, but cars, people traveling to State College from the east and only rarely traveling beyond. Thus, give people going to State College another transport alternative, and the existing roadway is more than capable of handling all the expected traffic. No highway megaproject needed. Okay, this gives us a direction. How do we get people going from the east to State College and back? Well, to start, State College is only 20 minutes away from the nearest Amtrak station in Tyrone, served by the state-funded Pennsylvanian, which goes from New York to Philadelphia, Harrisburg, and Pittsburgh. Unlike the Keystone Corridor running from Philadelphia to Harrisburg, which sees 28 trains a day, the territory west of Harrisburg gets only 1 train a day each way. That's a terrible frequency. Pittsburgh isn't the same as rural Iowa. Altoona is a major town in the region, and most other people live a short drive away from a ton of other stationable small towns. The line links two extremely large cities, 3 and 6 million people apiece, in one of the densest and most important regions in the country, and the existing train itself often sells out, indicating a major demand, largely due to the much smaller Juniata College in Huntington. So long as JC has the benefit of intercity passenger rail and is itself already selling out the existing service, I see no reason why the much larger and much more international State College shouldn't be afforded the same privilege. So, step 1, improve the Pennsylvanian. PennDOT is already looking at adding a second daily train, but it still runs the full route to New York, taking excess time. Thus, we should add at least a third Pennsylvanian, starting only from Philadelphia, if not Harrisburg. This will give central Pennsylvania towns a westbound much earlier in the morning and an eastbound much later at night, allowing people to make comfortable, unrushed day trips to Pittsburgh or intermediate stops, improving the ease of using the train with more departure options and better flexibility. I'll note that 3 cross-state round trips isn't an unrealistic luxury, but instead brings us to at least equivalent two-peer states. Michigan's Wolverine from Chicago to Detroit takes approximately the same time as from Pittsburgh to Philly, but also has 3 round trips a day. New York to Buffalo takes an hour longer, but has 4 daily round trips. And other states like North Carolina, Wisconsin, Illinois, Oregon, and California range from 14 to 58 regional intercity trains a day. As with many other aspects of this project, this is not a far-off gadget-bond technology like a Hyperloop or a maglev. This is not a delusional vision of a European utopia. This project merely brings us from the rear of the pack to the approximate middle among already existing transit services in peer U.S. states. These problems have already been solved elsewhere. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. Of course, work on a better Pennsylvanian will come with other projects like curve straightening, track improvements, and more crossovers for added flexibility amidst freight interference, but those are all smaller, more boring projects, so let's move on to other things. Now that we've fixed cross-state transit, what comes next? Well, this is where we go back to the DMUs and the crux of the whole plan. A frequent regional DMU service will plug the gap between State College and the Amtrak station in Tyrone, as well as extend to Altoona and beyond, but more on that in a moment. At present, and what makes this whole plan work, is that there's already a government-owned freight rail line that runs to within 2 miles of Penn State University. The Susquehanna Economic Development Association Council of Governments Joint Rail Authority, or CEDACOG-JRA, owns multiple rail lines from Tyrone to Lock Haven, Williamsport, Sunbury, Danville, Berwick, Shamokin, and Mount Carmel, notably including a branch to Bellefonte, Pleasant Gap, and Lamont. These rail lines are leased out to freight railroads, the Bellefonte line being served by the Nittany and Bald Eagle, but importantly, they're still government-owned. CEDACOG doesn't need to engage in protracted negotiations with a private company. They could snap their bureaucratic fingers and have passenger service running tomorrow if they so wished, more or less. Phase 1 of the CCHR plan involves utilizing these existing government-owned rail lines, maybe improving their rail quality a tad, and closing the last gap from Lamont to downtown State College with less than 2 miles of construction, a short tunnel under Oak Ridge Avenue, and a new station in downtown next to the intersection of University and College. This will not only reconnect Penn State with the rest of the Commonwealth by passenger rail for the first time in 80 years, it will also provide frequent, high-quality links between State College and the Benner Pike and Nittany Mall areas, Pleasant Gap, Bellefonte, and Milesburg. Furthermore, the line would be extended from Tyrone to Tipton, Bellwood, Altoona, and Hollidaysburg, allowing commuting not only to and around the Logan and Bald Eagle valleys, but also opening up the lucrative university jobs to these smaller Pennsylvania towns, and inversely allowing university staff or local workers disliking the hustle, bustle, and expense of State College to live in smaller, quieter communities. A note on service quality here. I'm hoping for very frequent headways throughout the day. As us advocates say, frequency is freedom. While it may be hard to maintain this all day across the whole line, some sections like Bellefonte to State College and Hollidaysburg to Juniata should run at least every 15 minutes, and the whole trip from Hollidaysburg to State College could be made every 30 or 45 minutes. Service hours would span 20 hours a day from 0430 to 0dark30, with headways during commuting hours and shift changes jumping to departures every 10 minutes locally and every 20 minutes regionally, or something equivalent as real-world demand patterns indicate. Now, while it's nice to finally have a return of rail transit, the existing route is circuitous, requiring a trip up and around Bald Eagle Mountain, then down Bellefonte and Lamont to State College. To say the least, this is neither convenient nor time competitive with driving. So how do we solve this? Well, Phase 2 of the Centre County Highway Revolt involves something I don't think has ever actually been proposed before, a medium-length railroad tunnel from Port Matilda to the Scotia Barrens, then picking up the historic Bellefonte Central Railroad right-of-way into State College along Railroad Avenue. Once this is done, a single railroad track could run along Calder Way or College Avenue in street trackage to reconnect with the old new station at College and University, reversing the flow of traffic from Lamont up to Milesburg. While hardly cheap, it is still cheaper than building the SCAC highway and will create the most direct route from State College to Blair County that has ever been made outside of, commuter heliport. This will finally make taking the train faster than driving and will allow for many more important stops. Stations at Graysdale, Science Park Drive, and West Campus will improve community connectivity and turn the DMU into a backbone of local transportation. The prime locations of Graysdale and Science Park Drive will be rife for development of new housing. The Scotia Barrens will be more than ever connected for transit-oriented nature, more on that in a moment. But most importantly, a park and ride in Port Matilda for Phillipsburg residents would allow for not only more eco-friendly transportation, but a faster, cheaper commute into State College, as well as helping communities like Port Matilda, Tyrone, and others to thrive by connecting them with lucrative university jobs and undergrad recreation dollars. The final part of the CCHR plan is very simple. Just don't stop building. One of the biggest reasons behind the rise in costs for North American rail infrastructure is the blow-and-go strategy, where major capital projects are funded, built, and then abandoned by the state. All of the institutional knowledge acquired by the designers and contractors during construction is then fired or forgotten, to then be expensively relearned all over again when it's time for the next hyper project 20 years later. A major international consortia for high-speed rail, i.e. a book I found at the Penn State University Library, found that slow, steady expansions of high-speed rail, like those done in Spain, Germany, or Japan, are usually much cheaper and more nimble than all-at-once boom strategies like in France and China. A famous example at the moment is California High-Speed Rail, which is trying to build an entire line in the middle of nowhere all at once for a final system usable by our grandchildren's grandchildren and at the cost of a small subcontinent's GDP, rather than starting a high-speed line from the major endpoint cities, LA and San Fran, and building out, one station at a time, bit by bit, so that you don't need the entire thing at the start in order for it to be useful, nor built all at once. As pertains to the CCHR, once the initial 2 phases of the DMU line are up and running, work should continue to further expand the system, if even just a single station at a time. A line to Boalsburg, Center Hall, Spring Mills, and Millheim would continue to improve local connectivity, extend the benefits of university jobs with small-town living up Penns Valley, connect to more outdoor recreation, and further still reduce the need for any local automobile traffic on 322. Notably, this route follows the old Lewisburg and Tyrone Railroad, whose right-of-way still exists, mostly untouched, making the alignment already pre-built with minimal demolition and property acquisition. It's worth observing that rural small-town train service like this is actually remarkably feasible. Going back to Switzerland's incredible rural rail network, the driver of its success is historic pre-car settlement patterns, called peri-urbanism, meaning that, while still being rural low-density, most people live in concentrated puncta of high-density, small walkable villages and clustered around train stations. Since Penns Valley, and, most of Pennsylvania, was built up before the car around train stations, its existing urban fabric fabric of villages is already peri-urban, like Switzerland, and thus begging for modern rail transit. If everybody already lives within walking distance of a station, well, let's build a damn station and give it train service. Anyway, after building a branch up Penns Valley, we should next build a local bypass from Benner Pike to the University Park Airport. While Pleasant Gap will continue to be served as an important suburban community, it makes more sense to serve the region's major airport and connect it with the university and downtown, not just for visitors, and not even because the airport is a major local job center with all the factories, warehouses, and airport workers themselves, but also because a cleverly placed station would also connect with Fisherman's Paradise, giving yet another opportunity for car-free access to nature. Once this is done, we could further extend the service up Bald Eagle Valley to Lock Haven. So long as Juniata College is already connected and Penn State is going to be, why shouldn't Lock Haven University? It, too, is a notable, if smaller institution with a highly peripatetic student population in need of convenient transport options. And then, after that, we can just keep building. Up to Williamsport, down to Sunbury, a branch to Bloomsburg University, then down the Susquehanna to Lewisburg, Selinsgrove, and then Harrisburg. At the extreme end, the old Lewisburg and Tyrone can be extended eastward through the mountains from Millheim to Lewisburg, allowing a slightly faster and more direct trip to Harrisburg from State College. All of this is admittedly a grandiose plan, but importantly, these are all viable routes to dense, important towns and villages on existing or historic railroad tracks that would minimize costs and disturbance to local communities, but with both modern technology that has been demonstrated successfully elsewhere and high frequencies and direct routes that make, while not all, at least most trips time and convenience competitive with driving. I'll explain more in a moment as to why and how this can be the case. The last few parts of the CCHR plan involve rounding out our car-free transport options. First, we'd like to have a frequent regional bus running along 322 from State College to Lewis Town with no less than half-hourly frequencies. For some very few intercity trips, it would be faster to not backtrack to Tyrone and instead connect with Amtrak by going southeast, but this bus would be more for commuters. Many people live in Lewistown because they work in State College, but their spouses work in Harrisburg or Hershey, and it's an inconvenient middle ground. By offering an all-day bus up and down the hill, it would not just ameliorate commuting woes and unnecessary car payments, as well as yet more Amtrak connectivity, it would also link Lewistown businesses with lucrative undergrad recreation dollars and provide everyone with outdoor opportunities on the Juniata River. Most importantly, each bus can hold up to 200 people. That is 400 cars off the road every hour, at least. Once again, as with the DMU, by providing a transit alternative, you can take care of the majority of traffic, leaving the existing road better capable of handling the load. You yourself may be disinterested in taking transit, but you shouldn't make that judgment for all of your neighbors, and every person that does take the bus or train is yet another car off the road in front of you. While I'm certain if it's properly implemented, you may actually like the transit options more than you're expecting, I am either way nonetheless quite positive we have better alternatives for solving both traffic and safety than the nearly $120 million per mile of cultural and agricultural institution demolition that PennDOT is proposing. And finally, the last part of the CCHR plan is to make a valley-wide bicycle trail network. Centre County is blessed with numerous wonderful natural amenities, not the least of which being the Mount Nittany Trails, Musser Gap, Collier Lake, Penn Roosevelt State Park, and of course the Mid-State Trail. However, they are all dubiously accessible by anything other than cars. Probably the most egregious example is that a bicycle trail runs from State College down Atherton Street to Bullsburg, but is separated from Galbraith Gap by less than a mile of absolutely life-threatening bicycling on the shoulder of Highway 322. It makes absolutely no sense to bicycle all the way back home, load the bike into a car, drive back, park, unload the bicycle, and continue your journey into the woods, all for less than a mile of missing infrastructure. And while the most obvious, this is just one of many such instances all over the county. The state has abdicated its duty to us as taxpayers and is instead providing us with an incomplete, deeply flawed, and needlessly tax-burdensome transportation system that we must pay to fix ourselves by buying cars and gas, which would be fully unnecessary to access natural recreation were we living in any other state or first-world country. This is also something I'll say more on very shortly now. So, to rectify this lapse, we need to build high-quality asphalt or macadam hiker-biker trails all across Penns Valley, possibly farther. The initial proposed routes in the CCHR plan are to plug the aforementioned gap in the bicycle trail from Bullsburg to Tussey Mountain, then extend it to Collier Lake. A second trail would run from Boalsburg along the old Lewisburg and Tyrone right-of-way and next to the new DMU line to Center Hall, Spring Mills, Coburn, and Millheim. Finally, a loop trail would connect from Center Hall to Coburn and continue into the woods to the Penn Roosevelt State Forest Campground. The most obvious use of these trails is recreational, as they connect to multiple hiking trailheads, a campground, and the loop trail could be used for out-and-back day trips. However, this is not the only purpose. For one, these trails could be just as much for commuting. The growing popularity of e-bikes and cargo bicycles for daily transportation necessitates accommodating infrastructure. Since cargo e-bicycles can carry up to 4 children and an adult, making them true minivan replacement bicycles, expecting a family of 5 to brave vehicular homicide every day for errands and school is a decidedly inhumane proposition. Bicycles deserve their own roads just as much as any car. More importantly, at risk of getting ahead of myself just one last time now, trails have a robust and proven economic stimulus potential. Pennsylvania's own studies have shown that peer bicycle trails generate millions of dollars in economic impact to trail towns every year by acting as magnets for outdoor recreation. This particular trail network would connect Millheim, Spring Mills, Center Hall, Boalsburg, and State College itself with the Mid-State Trail, a 500-kilometer-long trail stretching across the state from Maryland to New York. At current, hikers and bikepackers are encouraged to hike clear on through without spending any of their tourism dollars. Or conversely, the lack of trail-accessible amenities or transit options may in fact preclude people from hiking through at all. Okay, that's the CCHR plan. But that's all the what and the how. If you've stuck with me this long but are unconvinced, let's get to the why. I would like to re-emphasize that all of the following is extensively and exhaustively hyperlinked on the website, with citations supporting almost every single claim, many backed up by primary literature, the actual scientific research findings. Ergo, as best as can be reasonably done, these are not opinions, but hard, inescapable, unignorable facts. If you disagree with any of these claims, you do so in contrast with observable reality and to our collective detriment. Probably the most contentious but absolutely irrefutable reason for the CCHR plan is simply that car dependency represents big government overreach taking away our freedom. Car dependency is when the government only allows the building of communities designed for automobiles, prohibiting, disincentivizing, or endangering non-automotive travel, such as by not building safe sidewalks or bikeways, or by requiring population density so low it means no good transit service could ever reasonably serve the area without hellacious subsidy. In essence, car dependency is when you absolutely have to use a car to do basic daily functions, like go to work, get groceries, or recreate. Contrary to popular belief, in part because transit has been so neglected for so long in America, car dependency has nothing to do with a country's size, only its land use patterns. For example, some very large and very empty places like Western China and the frozen north of Nordic countries still have remarkably high-quality rail transit, but some dense small countries like Italy, Albania, Portugal, and coastal Brazil are severely lacking in intercity transit accessibility. The need to use a car is not a matter of space or technological superiority, but purely the actions of a government. If, without a car, you would be trapped in your house, it is not because your country is too big or too poor, but because the U.S. government decided to trap you in your house without a car by spending over $200 billion on only roads every year, rather than another mode of transportation. Car dependency is undeniably a choice. Moreover, car dependency isn't some esoteric policy disagreement. It is a very real and very serious problem that negatively affects most Americans right now. Especially because cars are so unnecessarily large and getting larger only in the US, they represent a serious threat to life, especially for vulnerable road users like bicyclists and pedestrians, or children running about in neighborhoods, those who choose not to drive, such as myself, or are disabled and can't. According to the CDC, automobile violence is a public health crisis, killing 45,000 Americans every year, the single leading cause of death for people under 55, disproportionately more deadly for disabled people, and more dangerous than all other forms of crime and violence combined. If you are the type of person to think that Chicago's South Side is a dangerous place, which I'll note it isn't, the most dangerous neighborhood of Chicago still has less crime than the entire state of Missouri, then the way to make it safer isn't to get rid of gangs, it's to get rid of the cars. Literally, that would save more lives. What's even scarier isn't just that cars are dangerous and that governments rob our freedom of movement by only building for cars, but that state DOTs justify spending exorbitant amounts of money on car infrastructure by literally fabricating data. In what has been termed highway robbery, DOTs make faulty reports and spread fear of forever increasing future congestion with traffic models that are, quote, junk pseudoscience, unquote. Literally, our own governments are lying to us that cars are better than other options when their own data can't even come to that conclusion without being manipulated. Directly quoting, traffic models violate professional standards and federal rules, unquote. In one particularly famous example of trying to widen a highway bridge across the Columbia River between Portland, Oregon and Vancouver, Washington, an independent audit found that, quote, widening the bridge would do nothing to improve I-5 congestion and would make it worse, that the DOT used invalid forecast metrics which rely on exaggerated forecasts from the regional models translating into unrealistic travel speed and travel time estimates, i.e. garbage in, garbage out, and that transit investments could help address I-5 congestion, but the DOT's failure to realistically evaluate transit would result in, quote, hyper-congestion, unquote. Closer to home, PennDOT is guilty for the same fraudulent behavior. Pennsylvania 576, a turnpike outside of Pittsburgh, had such inflated traffic forecasts that, despite that users are paying for it, its initial construction will take almost 60 years to pay off, decades longer than anticipated, and only after the whole highway will need to be completely repaved twice, adding even more to the cost. And that's not the only one. Another independent watchdog organization has determined that PennDOT is right now building 4 separate, quote, highway boondoggles of similarly low expected use. Meanwhile, amidst all of this new construction, Pennsylvania has some of the worst rated infrastructure in the nation as PennDOT routinely defunds maintenance of the existing and already bloated road network and perpetually threatens funding of PRT and SEPTA, its major sources of competition. In effect, state DOTs manipulate and falsify traffic forecasts to justify the expansion of their own infrastructural fiefdoms. Many Americans think driving is the best and most convenient option, and that's actually true, but only because rogue government bureaucracies invest trillions of dollars each year to make cars the best and most convenient option. I'll observe here that, even if you enjoy driving, properly funding alternatives to cars needn't come at your expense. Pennsylvania already has more lane miles than all of New York, New Jersey, and New England combined. So even ignoring transit funding, our existing network is too overbuilt to be properly maintained. If you want your roads to be well maintained, you'll prioritize taking care of the existing roads and support car alternatives to get people out of the traffic in front of you, freeing up congestion on your road and further reducing wear and tear. Conversely, if you like potholes and terrible states of repair, you'll love highway expansions. Another reason to support the CCHR is one I just alluded to. Getting people off the road in front of you reduces traffic, or, put another way, the only solution to traffic is a viable alternative to driving. A term being thrown around a lot today is induced demand. This means basically that, if you build it, they will come. Build a brand new highway, and it will free up traffic by spreading out space between cars and, say, smoothing merges. However, a freely flowing road is always fleeting. The more people realize the road is there, the more will use it. They won't just divert their driving from one place to another. They'll make more trips more often, drive to further away destinations, or even live further away and buy more cars, building their life around the new highway such that every movement of daily life results in more road miles. When this happens, traffic on the new road will grow and grow until all roads are equally as congested as before. What's constant is not the number of cars on the road, but people's willingness to sit in traffic. All over the world, the average length of delays is the same. People are willing to sit through about 1 hour of traffic delays and up to 3 hours of commuting each day, and every road will always fill up until precisely this level of congestion is met. This is not just some hidden scientific principle. Induced demand isn't just some hidden scientific principle. It was first demonstrated by the city of St. Louis in 1930. So, for 95 years, we have known that it is absolutely impossible to build your way out of congestion. Even worse, this is true for all roads collectively, not just area by area. Building a single new highway in a city increases traffic by approximately 10% citywide. So, if you're in Pittsburgh or Philadelphia and wondering why you should care about the faraway SCAC highway project, know that if a new highway to Penn State is built, your neighbor's kid who's going there for undergrad, or your coworkers who go there for football games, are now 10% more likely to buy a car, and once they own that car, they are more likely to use it in your community, increasing congestion at home. Make it easy to get to Penn State by transit, and fewer Pennsylvanians will use cars. Make it easier to get to Penn State by car, and more Pennsylvanians will use cars. So, if you want your own commute to be faster, you absolutely must oppose this highway and all others. Thankfully, induced demand also works in reverse, so-called reduced demand. Decommission highways and city traffic goes down, and this has been shown in places as far away as South Korea and San Francisco, or as close to home as Rochester, New York. Further still, you can actually improve driving times by improving transit. The scientifically demonstrated Downs-Thompson paradox stipulates that traffic will always be as bad as the door-to-door travel time of an equivalent trip on transit. This makes complete sense. If taking a bus or train is faster than driving, more people will do that. But conversely, if driving is faster, more and more people will drive, and traffic will get worse and worse right up until traffic is exactly as bad as the transit trip again. As such, car traffic can be solved by exclusively dealing in transit solutions. So, I'll say it here again for those in the back. The only solution to traffic is a viable alternative to driving. The contrarian might note that, while cars may not necessarily offer freedom of travel time, they do offer flexibility. The car departs exactly when you want and goes exactly where you want. However, in most cases, this is a fully unnecessary luxury. Firstly, equivalently fast transit departing every 15 minutes or so is so frequent that you don't ever need to worry about timing your activities to the train. You just show up at the station and the train will be there shortly enough anyway. For another, most people go from one dense, defined area to another, such as Millheim to State College, or Lewistown to Harrisburg, or Philly to the Beaver Stadium. While not every trip could be served by transit, most could, as arguably up to 80% of all road usage is not comprised of commutes from Orviston to Ashland, or Muncie to Rebersburg. Finally, for the people living further out, even though you might not live within walking distance of a train station, you probably live within biking distance. If you live within 6 miles of any village or potential station location, you could bike there in less than a half hour, and lesser still if you had an e-bike. Thus, enjoy your farm or rural living, but then bike to the station, take a quick train ride with your bike stowed on board, detrain, and bike the rest of the way to your destination. Again, I'll admit, not all possible trips could be solved by transit, but undeniably more than you're expecting. Were that transit to only exist, traffic on 322 would absolutely evaporate, I promise you. No highway needed. So, once again, the lesson to learn here is that the only solution to traffic is a viable alternative to driving. The only solution to traffic is a viable alternative to driving. The only solution to traffic is a viable alternative to driving. As far as the financials go, while many people complain that transit operates at a loss, and this is trivially refuted by observing that highways do too, I want to make a different, possibly more impactful point. According to Pennsylvania's own published numbers, highways are more expensive to both build and maintain than rail transit. Besides defense and social security programs, highways and roads are the 5th largest budgetary expenditure in the U.S., and 75% of that burden falls to local governments. The vast majority of PennDOT's $8 billion annual budget is spent on roads, and even just state-owned parking lots get subsidized to the tune of $88 million a year. If you want to check out the CCHR website, I pulled the 2024 to 2025 Commonwealth of Pennsylvania executive budget and did some math, proving that car infrastructure is more expensive than rail transit. Pennsylvania is currently building 268 new miles of highway at a cost of $3.91 billion, so that works out to $14.9 million per mile. By contrast, Pennsylvania is currently building 0 new miles of rail transit and has allocated less than $10 million to improving rail statewide. But reliable estimates from construction companies put new railroad track at approximately $1 to $3 million per mile, a full order of magnitude less. Even if land acquisition, design, and administrative overhead quadrupled this cost, it would still be cheaper than an equivalent highway. But that's just construction. As far as operations and maintenance goes, Pennsylvania devotes $1.14 billion to maintain 5,789 miles of highway, but only $143 million to maintain 1,001 miles of railroad track. So, per mile, highways cost $197,000 to maintain, whereas railroads cost $143,000. There is no contest. Trains are undeniably better for municipal tax expenditures than roads, saving from 27 to 93%. If you think about it, this actually does start to make intuitive sense. Highways are absolutely gigantic. I-99 by Port Matilda is over 200 feet wide, but a train track is less than 20 feet wide, saving an order of magnitude of land acquisition and earth moving. Furthermore, railroads are made with more durable steel, but highways are asphalt and concrete, which crack and weather every winter. Highways need to be resurfaced every 20 years, but rail can last up to 40. Cars are lightweight vehicles with an average lifespan under 17 years, but Amtrak is still using passenger cars from the 90s, and SEPTA has Silver Liners from the 70s. Sure, that's more a sign of underinvestment, but it just goes to show that a train can last much longer than a car with proper maintenance. Overall, trains are just better than cars, lasting longer and costing less, both to build and to maintain. It makes no sense for us to build our entire statewide transportation infrastructure around the least efficient and most expensive mode of transport. Sure, again, cars will never be fully eliminated, although I believe that this is an ideal end goal, but just imagine how many tax dollars have been completely wasted building absolutely everything to cater to the wrong paradigm. It frankly boggles the mind and makes no sense why we even have highways to begin with. Let's spend more money on a less good thing. I just can't even. So as far as the CCHR goes, a quick back-of-the-envelope calculation indicates that Phase 1 will come in at far less than the SCAC highway project, which, I remind you, is now estimated to be just short of $1 billion for 8 miles of highway. If we plugged the 2-mile gap from the existing government-owned railroad tracks in Lamont to downtown State College entirely as a tunnel and whoppingly over-engineered to high-speed rail standards, then upgraded the entire rest of the railroad tracks, bought the vehicles and the platforms, we'd likely still have half of the budget of the proposed highway left over. Future phases, such as the tunnel under Bald Eagle Mountain and new tracks through the Scotia Barrens, would obviously cost a lot more, but that's primarily because we're making up for lost time. Very importantly, I would propose that all of this be built not with new taxes, but by reallocating existing taxes from roads to rail. The whole point of this project is to change the paradigm on how we move around, and a 20% increase in rail miles would be more than offset by a 30% increase in highway miles, having a net negative effect and moving in the wrong direction. We're not trying to advocate for more or fewer taxes. It's for somebody else to argue about the size of the pie, but what's undeniable is that transit absolutely deserves a larger slice of the pie than it currently has, and that this would most ideally come at the expense of roads and highways. It's just simply a better, more efficient use of our tax dollars. But it's not just the use of tax dollars which should concern you. Car dependency also directly harms the local economy. Especially in the past 30 years, the U.S. has experienced an urban revival, with people in general and especially younger generations choosing to move back to deep inner cities and walkable urban neighborhoods. State College, being a college town, is preternaturally at the whims of younger collegiates when choosing which university to attend, and there are already anecdotal reports out there of students and faculty declining appointments at Penn State because it's too remote and inaccessible. Small towns are not necessarily to blame, but more car-dependent small towns. Small towns which are adequately connected to vast rail systems and which have good transit and walkability are doing just fine. Places like Bellingham, Washington, Davis, California, and Bloomington, Normal, Illinois are absolutely booming, in no small part because they have robust local transit and intercity rail connections, which allow people the best of both worlds. Live in a cute small town, but have good local transit so that you don't need an expensive car for daily life, and have robust intercity rail connections so that you're not marooned in a small town and can go and visit a big city whenever the need strikes. This phenomenon isn't just unique to undergrads, it applies to faculty, staff, and even potential townies as well. A recent survey from the National Association of Realtors found that less than 50% of Americans prefer single-family homes, even though over 70% of the national housing stock is. Furthermore, over 80% of Americans would be willing to pay higher prices and live in smaller homes if it meant that the home was in a more walkable area. In fact, in every city in America save 5, a more walkable house elicits a sale price premium, and a single percentage point in increased walk score equates to over $4,000 of increased home value. However, even though there is a clear preference for walkability by homeowners, urban townhomes, multi-story apartments, and mixed-use zoning are flatly prohibited by zoning laws in most locations. This drives up the price of what few walkable multifamily homes are left, and encourages the gobbling up of pristine forests and farmlands in soulless tracts of McMansions for those of us left behind with normal budgets. The CCHR plan would solve many of these issues. By bringing transit to pre-existing but distal small towns which already have peri-urban walkable cores, it creates the overall walkability that people are clearly craving, enriches the existing residents by boosting home values, and revitalizes small towns in general as more appealing to younger, more transit-oriented generations. And most importantly, improving transit accessibility to Penn State is absolutely vital for its maintained competitiveness among undergrads, which in turn is pivotal for the continued economic prosperity of Centre County, as Penn State is the economic powerhouse of the region and the largest employer by an order of magnitude, having over 25,000 more employees than the next largest institution. Beyond the nuances of undergrad preference and potential new residents living in town, the existing businesses themselves are harmed by car dependency. A few years ago, before the Washington Post abandoned the concept of reporting, their Department of Data, the other DoD, did an exhaustive analysis to find out which places have the fewest local establishments and the most chain and franchise businesses, places termed mixed cities. Their results found that the single factor most responsible for so-called chaininess was the percent of the population that drove for daily errands. The more people drove as their primary mode of transportation, the worse local businesses fared and the more chains infiltrated the community. This is problematic because chain businesses not only stifle local entrepreneurship, but they slowly siphon small amounts of overhead to large, faraway corporate headquarters, robbing the community of its prosperity. This chaininess is likely due to the act of driving itself. If you're hurtling through a community at 40 to 120 kilometers per hour, you don't have much time to window shop, so you're more likely to settle for familiar known quantities which can be seen by large signs from the road. By contrast, walkable places allow for people to stop, window shop, and make spontaneous discoveries, ergo investing in the unfamiliar. Think about it. Coming to a dead stop to check out a new restaurant is infinitely easier and less dangerous if you're a pedestrian on a sidewalk or a bicyclist in a bike lane than a car in the middle of a road. As such, and in no small part because they have extra money from the huge expensive car they're not paying for, pedestrians and bicyclists spend disproportionately more at local businesses than drivers. However, despite this, business owners routinely overestimate the percentage of their customers which travel by automobile, even though the data demonstrate conclusively that car accessibility directly harms their profitability. Furthermore, car dependency and its concomitant chaininess leads to a loss of local identity, becoming an anywhere USA, which itself impairs tourism and revenue growth. In fact, a growing segment of tourism involves experiencing local culture, such as with food tours. If your culinary scene is identical to, say, Philadelphia, or indistinguishable from any other small Pennsylvania town, then your community will lose out on tourism dollars to those competing places. Thus, to increase tourism revenue, you have to have more local businesses, and to do that, you have to have less car-dependent environments. Think about it. People go to New York City to be tourists, not Houston, probably because New York City is more transit accessible, whereas Houston is not. I would like to emphasize that this is not just some esoteric chain of logic. There is hard scientific evidence that local businesses do better when they are in walkable environments, even when the business is in a rural area. Please check the website for my citations on this. It is an absolutely true fact. Some of you might be wondering why car dependency is bad for business, and I can succinctly summarize it with two jokes. First, and only, how do you know where the train went? It left tracks. And the other I'll attribute to Jim Matthews, CEO of the Rail Passengers Association, who notes, "What do trains carry? People? No, they carry wallets." In essence, rail infrastructure is a massively permanent inculcation of confidence of people being directly in your immediate area. If you are a business or a homeowner nearby a rail station, you are guaranteed for the lifetime of that station, which Philadelphia indicates can last for literal hundreds of years, that people will be in that proximity. This fact drives desirability for anywhere within walking distance of a train station, literally creating wealth out of thin air. And incidentally, this is exactly why a train is better than a bus. It is visibly permanent, whereas a bus is fleeting and can change from year to year. As far as tourism goes, Europe and even local bicycle trails in Ebensburg, Indiana, Kittanning, and West Newton have demonstrated that direct multimodal access influences people's behavior. Those who don't have access to or choose not to own a car are fundamentally magnetized to non-car infrastructure. As long as Maryland and southwestern Pennsylvania have the Gap Co. and New York has the Erie Canal Trail, central Pennsylvania will forever be overlooked for hiking and bicycle touring. But to have regional bicycle trails and transit-accessible hiking opportunities will poise the area as the regional destination for flexible outdoor adventuring. And so long as such tourism exists, local establishments can serve the hikers, bikers, and hungry adventurers passing through. Again, transit-accessible recreation literally creates demand, which can be capitalized on by local entrepreneurs. So, in general, walkability is good for the economy, whereas car dependency is bad. Rural tourism is not just facilitated, but created by car-free accessibility, and overall, even rural small businesses are specifically and directly benefited by walkable and transit-oriented infrastructure, just like their urban counterparts. Related to trailside development of local businesses, the CCHR plan will help to make nature accessible to all by providing car-free access to outdoor recreation. Every part of the CCHR plan provides access to nature. The DMU will have stations at Graysdale, the airport, Bellefonte, Lamont, Bullsburg, and Milheim, offering access to the Scotia Barrens, opposite ends of Fisherman's Paradise, Mount Nittany, Tussey Mountain, and the Midstate Trail, respectively, for hiking, rafting, skiing, and long-distance bikepacking. Further DMU expansions to Lock Haven and Williamsport allow for additional rafting and backpacking adventures, as does the bus to Lewistown. Finally, the proposed bicycle trail network is not only a recreational end in itself, it pivotally connects frequent, convenient regional transit with the Midstate Trail, canoeing and kayaking, and bikeable, hikeable campsites. That's an enormous upgrade from the present arrangement, where any of the above involves either the needlessly expensive ownership of a car or a harrowing, life-threatening afternoon on the side of a literal highway. Again, these aren't just abstruse personal benefits, they directly impact the economy. Outdoor recreation constitutes 2% and growing of Pennsylvania's economy, contributing nearly $9 billion annually to local jobs and creating over $1 billion to the state GDP. A new bicycle trail is a superb return on investment, resulting in reliably 50% more jobs than equivalent spending on roads, millions of dollars in local spending, and even a premium sale price on homes within 60 feet of a trail. In general, building long-distance bicycle trails, quote, makes economic sense, unquote. Nationwide, outdoor recreation is a $1 trillion industry that is even outpacing population growth, and Pennsylvania has, I would like to say in spite of itself, a larger outdoor recreational economy than any other mid-Atlantic state. Imagine how much more massive outdoor recreation revenue could be if we made our region conveniently accessible to all the tech bros and financiers of New York City or the artists of Philly, both of whom are increasingly disinterested in owning cars. By having a direct rail connection, we could outcompete the Poconos, Maryland, and West Virginia simply by being more frequently and conveniently accessible. Rather than burying our trailheads far away from urban centers, we need transit to trails or trails to trails. But probably the most damning evidence for transit-accessible nature is car companies themselves. Whereas before, cars could be sold on freedom, style, or power, now the inescapable dirge of traffic, record-high ownership costs, threat of debilitating oil prices, highest road-related death rates of any developed country, and growing competition from car replacement cargo bicycles means that cars are relegated to being sold on the quality of their music systems or, more commonly, access to nature. Think about it. How many advertisements do you see these days with cars innocently loping around a surreal natural landscape as if access to a campsite is a reason enough to pay thousands of dollars a month in insurance, loans, gas, tires, and maintenance for the ill-conceived privilege of owning a wilderness battle wagon? With fewer and fewer realistic reasons to own a car companies try to reinforce the false belief that cars are the only and last best way to access nature. But, to quote 1990s infomercials, there's got to be a better way. But even bigger than your own personal finances, car dependency directly harms your health. In effect, driving is the simple act of sitting in a fetal position for long periods of time while any movement is accomplished by barrel-aged dinosaur farts rather than your own metabolism. Unlike walk or bikeability, driving creates sedentary lifestyles built around sitting at speed from one place to another. To this end, driving results in reduced activity, obesity, and even impaired sleep and mental health. It is for these reasons and others that Americans die younger than any other peer country. While it is, of course, possible to maintain physical activity with, say, a gym membership, that takes, of course, not only additional money, but time. In this paradigm, fitness is available only to the sufficiently motivated, affluent, and liquid. Unless, of course, that is, health is wrapped up in our daily errands. You see, the CDC recommends at least half an hour of exercise each day, and while that might necessitate a separate half-hour trip to the gym each day, what if bicycling to work took only 40 minutes round trip? In this case, 30 of the 40 minutes would not be travel, but exercise, leaving only 10 minutes devoted to purely travel. If we use a car, however, the equation becomes much more bleak. Turning a 40-minute bike commute into a 20-minute car commute is actually slower, because you still have to spend half an hour exercising at the gym, making the car trip actually 10 minutes slower than bicycling, not including additional travel time to and from the gym. Even just taking transit has been shown to increase physical activity and lead to happier, healthier lives, whereas relying on cars for transportation and gyms for exercising is inequitable, forcing impoverished people to spend even more money and time on a gym membership just to follow doctors' recommendations, on top of the already debilitating costs of car ownership. Cars don't just lead to sedentary, unhealthy lifestyles, they directly pollute our neighborhoods and hurt the health even of those who don't drive. Tire dust is a major carcinogen and the source of up to 80% of ocean microplastics. Although the exact percentage is debated, the conclusions all indicate that tires alone are a humongous source of pollution. Just living near major roadways has been shown to dramatically increase the rates of asthma, cardiovascular diseases, reproductive defects, endocrine diseases, fertility issues, exposure to volatile organic compounds, carbon monoxide, and ozone, hearing loss, hypertension, shorter attention spans, worse sleep, behavioral dysregulation, and a host of other health problems. In fact, tire dust is so toxic it has been linked with multiple salmon and trout die-off events. Additionally, tires themselves cause noise pollution, which results in stress and impairs health. Notably, electric vehicles will not solve pollution, as their humongous batteries make EVs heavier than regular cars, leading to both more tire dust and more noise. Interestingly, while car companies use car speakers to pipe in anti-sense sound waves and mute out road noise, tire dust pollution harms drivers almost as much as people who live on major highways. Irrespective of the CCHR plan, if you care about your children at all, don't drive them. Do literally anything else to get them around. They will thank you for it later with their reduced risks of cancer. Even just the act of driving itself is stressful, which has negative health implications. The COVID-19 pandemic actually provided an interesting natural experiment. In surveys, bicyclists said that they missed their daily commutes more than any other group, followed by transit users. Drivers, however, were the least nostalgic of commuting and were the most likely to note that commuting or travel is stressful. It should thus come as no surprise that bicycling and transit improve not only people's physical health, but their mental health. And there's even evidence that being a bicyclist makes you a better, more moral person than drivers. Finally, cars aren't just bad for your health, they also increase your likelihood of death by meat crayoning or chunky marinarification. Worldwide, cars are the leading cause of death for people under 30, and in the US for people under 55. Over 45,000 Americans die each year from automobile violence, and in some years, cars were the single most common cause of death, outpacing cancer and heart disease. Astonishingly, as I write this, the CDC webpage calling cars a, quote, public health crisis, unquote, is still up, although with the new administration it could disappear at any minute, but irrespective of this, there are many different time-stamped news articles validating that it once did. This isn't even just due to crashes, sane-washed as accidents. Cars are now increasingly being used as intentional weapons, probably the most famous example being the 2017 Charlottesville neo-Nazi and Trump supporter rally. The FBI and DHS have now even created and are tracking a new and growing category of terrorism, vehicle ramming. One car can mow down dozens of innocent bystanders, the same as any machine gun, and with cars being disturbingly common, it's practically impossible to keep them out of the hands of bad actors. But as bad as all of this is, there is in fact a single solution to all of these ills: walking, biking, and transit. People who use active transportation have reduced likelihood of cancer, heart problems, obesity, and are just more fit and healthy overall. Active transportation is equally as effective as regular exercise, saving money from future premature healthcare expenditures and creating a green dividend of money saved for society as a whole. Active transportation also improves mental health, with commuting time being spent not on attentively piloting a metal box as it hurtles down an asphalt chute, but instead on quietly self-reflecting, decompressing, and engaging in me time. Society has a lot of problems these days, and it's naive to think that there's one simple trick to cure all ills, but if there was one catch-all solution, it might just be as simple as getting rid of cars. The last points I want to make about why you should support the Centre County Highway Revolt are environmental. I have specifically downplayed this element of the project because there are so many more immediate reasons to do this simply beyond climate change, but these data are just so stark it's unavoidable. Starting with the raw environmental destruction, every proposed route of the SCAC highway involves the demolition of hundreds of acres of pristine forests or heritage area-listed farms. Again, a train is 15 to 20 feet wide, a bicycle trail is less than 12 feet wide, But in contrast, the existing 322 is 50 feet wide, and I-99 is over 200 feet wide, causing an order of magnitude worse destruction. Parts of the existing 322 are so wide you could run a 6-track railroad mainline along it, and that's ignoring the highway. This kind of railroad capacity will never be needed in Centre County, so why are we giving up that much space to cars? The loss of this agricultural land, of course, impairs the local economy and the forest, our outdoors economy, but notably, highway noise also reduces tourism appeal. So were we to build this highway, even if we could grab a view of Penns Valley without it in view, and even though it would slightly shorten travel times, you would always be able to hear the highway, and that alone would drive away skiers at Tussey, hikers at Rothrock, and any non-resident wanting to visit Penns Valley for any reason. Highways just simply make for unpleasant physical environments. But that aside, I do want to emphasize here that cars are the single worst contributor to climate change. Numerous sources note that transportation is the largest sector for carbon emissions, and light-duty personal automobiles are the largest contributors to transportation emissions, making them the worst of the worst. Collectively, cars, SUVs, and trucks emit 80% of all transportation greenhouse gases. Put one way, the private cars of just Texas alone are responsible for 0.5% of all planetary carbon emissions. Put another way, if just SUVs, no other type of car, were their own country, they'd be the 6th most polluting nation in human history. And that's made even more stark by the fact that SUVs are almost entirely the domain of the North American market, with all other overseas markets preferring smaller, more practical cars. Really, the only way that cars could be worse for the environment is if they were all coal-powered. Oh, wait, they already are. Most asphalt binding and road topcoat agents are made from coal polymers, so even if every single vehicle in the country was an EV powered by 100% renewable energy, the mining pollution and runoff still wouldn't stop. Putting this in bleak contrast, 2 recent scientific reviews made no ambiguous conclusions. Quoting directly, betting solely on EVs would add half of national electricity demand and require an excessive amount of critical materials. Electrification is not a silver bullet. There is therefore a need for a wide range of policies that include measures to reduce vehicle ownership and usage. And only by reductions in the convenience of car travel and large increases in its monetary costs can large and sustained reductions in travel greenhouse gases be produced. Again, as stark as the situation is, there is a simple solution: just reduce car usage. The pandemic demonstrated all over the world that by simply getting rid of cars, smog and pollution in cities would be completely abrogated. Banning cars in Times Square or restricting cars in Santiago, Chile led to immediate reductions of pollution and toxic chemical exposure. In contrast to cars, both freight and passenger trains together are responsible for only 2% of carbon emissions, despite carrying almost 40% of all goods, and trains produced less carbon dioxide, less nitric oxide, less particulate pollution, and are more energy efficient than cars by practically infinity. Each freight train takes over 300 trucks off the road, and the average Amtrak train removes over 200 cars off the road every day. Even at existing ridership and with centenarily outdated equipment, existing trains are still 3 times more energy efficient than driving. Imagine how much better it could be with modern equipment and investment. As such, with all of this taken in whole, it is no small conclusion that car travel should be made as arduous, difficult, and expensive as possible, and car-free transportation prioritized over automobiles in every way. Cars provably rob our communities of identity, prosperity, appeal, safety, and health, and are directly responsible for, if not all, then definitely a large portion of society's modern problems. It is an inescapable conclusion that we should be decommissioning highways, not building more of them. The vitality of our neighborhoods depends on it. So, naturally, that all begs the question. After hearing all of this, what can you do to help? How can you help fight back against the SCAC highway and permanently end car dependency in your community for good? Well, the easiest and most straightforward way is to advocate for the Centre County Highway Revolt yourself. Immediately go to palegis.us/findmylegislator. That's Papa Alpha Limo Echo Golf Indigo Sierra .uniform Sierra /Foxtrot Indigo November Delta Michael Yankee Lima Echo Golf Indigo Sierra Lima Alpha Tango Oscar Romeo. And send your state representatives a strongly worded email that you want a complete end to PennDOT road construction ever again, a reorientation of existing policy to favor active transportation, specifically at the expense of cars and car infrastructure, and the construction of a modern, convenient, car-free alternative in the form of frequent intercity DMU transit and regional bicycle trails, both in and around Centre County and across the state. Be sure to also direct these concerns to PennDOT itself. Look up your local PennDOT district managers and send them similar emails. Search for the State College Area Connector Project website and fill out the feedback forms in favor of a no-build option and the construction of a rail alternative instead. And finally, contact every county, borough, township, or any possible municipal official you can find in both the CCHR project area and across the state, and tell them you support walkable infrastructure and a broad-scale deprioritization of automobiles. If we get thousands of people emailing their state legislators that they want an end to PennDOT road construction and a sunsetting of car infrastructure, it'll be impossible to ignore. Being deeply involved in local politics myself, you'd be dumbfounded how much politicians actually listen to their constituents and are hungry for more feedback. If nothing else, loudly proclaiming a policy position puts the onus on them, but failing to advocate means it's our problem. And hopefully, by rabble-rousing enough, we can make this plan for Central Pennsylvania rail and bicycle infrastructure a campaign issue so that we can primary out the politicians who remain unresponsive. If you're one of my regular listeners, or just don't live anywhere in Pennsylvania, don't be afraid to also contact Pennsylvania legislators in favor of the CCHR project, but also don't forget to contact your own state's legislators, DOT officials, and community electeds as well, and tell them to support similar goals, an end to car dependency and the construction of high-quality rail transit and bicycle corridors, both in and outside of metro areas. Actually, if you wanted, feel free to take this template that we've come up with and create a highway revolt of your own. The world needs a lot less car infrastructure, and this is an all-hands-on-deck quest. You probably know of a few transit gaps in your local community, so start with that, and shop around to existing organizations like your local Strong Towns chapter and see if they can start advocating for it. If you really want to, go big like the CCHR. Importantly, prioritize rail over buses in all that you do because the return on investment is much higher with rail and the changes are more wide-sweeping and permanent. The scientific data shows that people take the bus because they have to, but people take the train because they want to. Finally, and this is a curveball I don't think many other people are advocating for, look up your local ABCs, authorities, boards, and commissions, and submit an application. Many municipalities or governmental divisions have citizen advisory councils which review and direct the month-to-month activities of municipal staff as they first pass feedback before changes are sent to the elected council members. In part because they are so unknown as a function of local service, many always have vacancies to fill, so search up which ones are looking for new transportation or planning commissioners. If your municipality's transportation commission is full, look for your counties. If that's full, look for any regional planning organizations lacking a board member. If you're really crazy, look up if your state-level TC allows civilian oversight. If all of those aren't options, see if your local transit agency's board of directors is unfilled, or see if the planning commission is recruiting. The last one is important because, as I like to say, climate policy is transportation policy, and transportation policy is land use policy. These are three sides of the same hypercoin. And at last, if every one of these options is close to you, if you haven't lived somewhere long enough, or if you feel your volunteerism or expertise resumes are lacking, just pick one ABC that best suits your interests and show up to every meeting as a civilian. Show your face, make yourself known, provide a short public comment on every item, and next time a commissioner seat is open, submit an application, knowing you've already proven your worth as an insightful, contributive individual. The world is very messed up at the moment, and we're presently footing the bill for a bunch of really stupid past decisions. But solutions to these problems already exist elsewhere. We don't have to wait around for mythical technologies to magically come and save us from our own mistakes. We can instead use the proven tools we already have to fix things right now. There are ways we can advocate for this. We all just need to use them and push in a unified direction for progress. So please join me and all others who have contributed and support the Centre County and your own Highway Revolt. Let's show them what we're made of, and all advocate for a better future together. This has been episode 10 of the Proto-Future podcast, introducing the Centre County Highway Revolt. The theme music is Spark of Life by Benjamin Lazarus through Tribe of Noise. I would like to thank my extremely generous and patient patrons Pedro Reyes, Andrew Lavergetta, Ron Kleiss, Bill Ford, Linda Eskin, and Roger Coleman. If you would like to know more, you can visit the website at www.bgtmrring.org. That's Bravo Golf Tango, Michael Romeo Romeo, Indigo November Golf. Oscar Romeo Golf. To listen to the Manifesto and Prologue series, watch the Modern Modeling Clinic anthology, or read the free-to-access Patreon production blog. And please consider donating on a monthly basis to help defer the fact that I just spent $2,100 on a month-long statewide ad campaign. This content is provisionally CAN-credentialed. You can report instances of harassment, abuse, or other harm on their hotline at 617-249-4255 or on their website at creatoraccountabilitynetwork.org. This podcast was written, recorded, and produced on the ancestral lands of the Susquehannock people. I would like to thank them for their historical stewardship of central Pennsylvania. Thank you very much for listening. Keep riding trains, keep punching Nazis, and keep building a better future. Alright guys, there's a lot to be said about this, not the least of which being that this particular episode has been optimized by AI. I myself am personally very, very opposed to AI usage in almost every single possible scenario. I think it is largely a bubble being pushed by big tech companies that does not have any practicable use. However, in this one very specific and particular incident, there was some extremely problematic interference caused by, I think, accidentally bumping a cable while I was recording, and so largely the episode was unlistenable. I do have, I guess, poor Roger Coleman on my beck and call in order to improve things, but in order to keep up with the timeline of a monthly output, it was neither practicable to go through this entire episode and manually repair all of the audio interference issues, nor was it practicable to send the entire episode to him and ask him to repair it for me. So in this one instance, I happened to buy Adobe Podcast AI Studio in order just simply to remove the fizzing and crackling and popping, even if the end result is obscenely unpleasant. I rather quite hope that I don't have to do this again. I will inspect my microphone for issues, but otherwise, I hope that that explains any sort of issues in the audio quality that you have interpolated as a result of this. Now, that all being the case, this audio is about 2 months old by the time that I actually have published it. So things have happened in the meanwhile, not the least of which being that I have been interviewed by Newsweek, MSN, and also a local radio channel, 98.7 FM, the Fox State College. They actually invited me into their studio. I did almost an hour's worth of content. I was personally blown away by both the professionalism of their interviewing and also the professionalism of my own personal responses. To my understanding, PennDOT, the Center Region Council of Governments, and several other local organizations are familiar with this project. So, as best as I can interpolate, this project actually seems to be moving forward. Again, I would like to emphasize to you guys, as much as you can, anybody listening right now, please contact your local legislators about a local project, and then also the Pennsylvania legislators about this particular Pennsylvania project. The overall theme that we're going for here is that rural America will never ever vote to fund transit so long as rural America lacks transit. However, there are in fact robust instances overseas demonstrating that transit is entirely feasible in rural environments. There is therefore no reason why we cannot have that here. So, if you want transit in big cities, you should also vote to fund transit, rail transit specifically, in rural environments. And that's exactly why we are here. So please, do everything you can to support this project. Contact every state, local, and national legislator that you can in order to help support this project, and more importantly, the concept behind this project, that automobile infrastructure is an incorrect use for American tax dollars. Anyway, sorry for this potentially repetitive epilogue, but thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for listening through the AI shitty optimized version, but it was the best I could do under the circumstances. And no, actually, honestly, thank you for listening. I genuinely appreciate you as a listener, and I will be looking at Centre County Highway Revolt.org website traffic as an indication of how many people actually listen to this project. So, I mean, just honestly, if you're here, if you're still listening, truly, to you, I mean it. Thank you. Let me know how you enjoy it. Let me know how you enjoy the entire concept of the whole podcast. I know that several thousand people at least listen to this podcast on a monthly basis, but I don't really hear that much from them. So, from you, really. So just, let me know your thoughts. Let me know what you like. Let me know what you don't like. And just, yeah. Otherwise, overall, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoy this podcast. I hope you enjoy this episode. I hope I have inspired you to do something. And thank you for listening. Toodaloo.